All right, well, I think we're going to go ahead and start. And I will start with an introduction. Hello, my name is Catherine Leonard. I am the State Historic Preservation Officer for Arizona, and it is my pleasure today to bring with you, along with the Arizona Preservation Foundation, the next webinar installment in our Preservation in Place series. The Preservation in Place series began in concept in 2020 during the height of the pandemic, when we, as a partnership, APF and this Arizona State Historic Preservation Office, decided to continue to offer our statewide conference, but to move it to what was then a very unique online format. We renamed our conference Preservation in Place to acknowledge that we were all in our homes, but yet continuing to learn and thrive. Since that time, we have had our conference, and we have continued the tradition of at-home continuing education and historic preservation through our series. I think we have almost about 10 webinars that we have produced so far. The topics have ranged from examining adaptive reuse and creative programming at the Dunbar School in Tucson, looking at diversity, equity, and inclusivity in the field of archaeology and cultural resource management. We've done webinars on historic artifact identification, webinars on LGBTQ plus history, and this most recent three-part series examines the issue of sustainability in historic preservation practice. And in this series, we have had two webinars that have come before. The first one focusing on deconstruction techniques as a method of preserving essential elements of buildings, and the second examining adaptive reuse of historic buildings, because as we all know in preservation, the greenest building is the one that already exists. This last series will look at sustainability in terms of design. And I would be completely remiss if I did not credit the genesis of this three-part series to Arizona Preservation Foundation's intern, Alicia Adolph. Alicia has an abiding interest in the intersection between preservation and sustainability, and she has done a fantastic job of bringing together some very well-known speakers who are going to be presenting to you today. And so without ado, I will turn it over to Alicia.
Thank you, Catherine. Hello, happy Preservation Month, everyone. As Catherine said, my name is Alicia Adolph, and I'm a Public Allies intern for Arizona Preservation Foundation. And this is the last webinar in the series. And if you missed the previous two, they are on our YouTube channel titled Arizona Historic Preservation. The inspiration for this webinar series comes from the saying, "The greenest building is the one that already exists." So I wanted to touch on the ways that preservation can be sustainable. So this webinar covers the environmental benefits of preservation through sustainable design projects across Arizona. And we can learn from past generations' designs to learn how buildings can be best designed for their climate and landscape. And we can use this knowledge to design our new buildings and incorporate them into our rehabilitation projects. And I do want to mention that during the webinar, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We will have a Q&A after all of our speakers present today. Our speakers today are Don Ryden with Ryden Architects, Jason Wills with American Campus Communities, and Russ Myers with Kitchell. Our first speaker, Don Ryden, is from Phoenix, Arizona, and studied at Arizona State University's College of Architecture. He is a well-rounded professional who tirelessly pursues the practice of architecture with a sincere concern for the environment, respect for the cultural context, and adherence to the timeless doctrines of harmonious design. He devotes most of his professional time and energy within three major disciplines: architecture, planning, and historic preservation. As an architect, Mr. Ryden is skilled in all aspects of professional services, ranging from programming through design and production to construction observation. As a planner, Mr. Ryden has successfully completed master planning projects involving sensitive natural and cultural resources, economic redevelopment, transportation modes, zoning considerations, and public government interaction. He has served as the Arizona State Historic Preservation Coordinator for the American Institute of Architects, was a member of the Arizona Historic Advisory Commission to the state legislature, and currently serves as Vice Chair of the State Historic Sites Review Committee. As a scholar and author, he has revealed the architecture of optimism in his groundbreaking book, Mid-Century Marvels, Commercial Architecture of Phoenix. So without further ado, I present Don Ryden.
Thank you very much, Alicia. I really appreciate the introduction. So let's get into this. There's so much to learn from the past. Today, we're going to look at the comfortable Arizona home and how secrets of the past can inform our lifestyles of the future. So, contrary to popular belief, historic preservation is more about the future than it is about the past. So that's the first myth busting we need to do today. Historic preservation discoveries are relevant to every modern homeowner. And hidden within the homes of the past, we find territorial technology tips that create an affordable, comfortable home now and in the future. We can learn a lot from the past to apply it to our own homes. We've worked with archaeologists in seeing the lifestyles of peoples here in the Salt River Valley that had not the advantages of modern technologies like we do. And so helping the Yavapai people come up with design guidelines for new development in their reservation, we looked at the precursors of the Hohokam Pit House, Salado Pueblos, the Yavapai Wickiup, and even Anglo-American adobes of the 19th century to come up with recommended way of building and planning in a Yavapai desert style, which we created ourselves, that has evaluated and applied all of the principles that Native peoples had used in the past. It's interesting to see how the past has influenced the present. So take a look up here at the top. You see Helsing's Coffee Shop that was informed in its design by the Googie's Coffee Shop by architect Lautner, and he in turn had studied at Taliesin with Frank Lloyd Wright. And yet, where did Frank Lloyd Wright get his ideas for the masonry and the roof slopes of Taliesin West? He found it in the ruins of places like Wapatki. But there came a time when, after World War II, we had a whole new desert living technology revolution. Machinery and mass production has taken over from the ideas of vernacular or traditional architecture and home building. To take a look at this and how it affects you, or what are the factors that affect you, we look at 4 simple points that we have to control in designing sustainable new houses. Temperature and humidity, here in the diagram. On the side, you see on the left, the thermometer. Across the bottom, you see the relative humidity gauge. Now, over on the right side, you see shading. And on the left side, you see sunshine or exposure. So airflow is also a factor that we need to take into consideration to make everything absolutely comfortable for the guy lounging there in that zone of comfort on this chart. The best example of historic architecture that can address all of these issues at once is the Spanish Courtyard House. It is the actual machine for passive cooling actions by avoiding heat, slowing heat, storing heat, and removing heat. Here you see the Sierra Bonita Ranch from 1872. It was an Anglo ranch building that was built atop the ruins of a Spanish hacienda. The idea of having a courtyard with fountains and greenery in it, the idea of having breezes coming through the passageway and filtering up through the courtyard using a gravity stack effect helps to cool this house. It also uses a basement here that is earth integration that keeps that room cool as well. Here's the daily cycle of how a Spanish courtyard house really works. This is all done without any mechanical means. In the daily cycle, the house, which is both the lungs and the heart of the house, will inhale cold air from the cold night sky and exhaust air, the hot air of the rooms, out the upper windows. In the morning, you close the windows and hold that cold air inside your thick adobe walled rooms. In the afternoon, you open the windows again and exhale the hot air out the top and pull it in from the sides. And then once again in the evening, you use the warm air within the walls of the house to warm you in the cool of the night. This is a machine that never breaks. This is cutting edge, low technology. So let's take a look at what we can learn from historic houses of the past. I'll just go quickly through some of the milestones of technology, beginning with the early Native Americans, with the technology available and the concepts of orientation and shading used at Montezuma's castle in cliff dwellings. And two, here in the lower desert, the idea of earth integration of pit houses and insulation of soil over lightweight framing was the way that the Hohokam people took care of living in comfort in the hot desert. With the coming of the Spanish settlers, they brought with them the first planning and zoning ordinances of the New World. It was called the Laws of the Indies. Those were compiled in 1683, and it explained how best to plan your cities and plan your homes in the arid Southwest. So here you can see what you would recognize as a typical Spanish town with a plaza and cathedral off to one side, and it's surrounded by streets. This is kind of like fractal planning, because the idea of having a city planned densely around an open space is exactly the larger model when you compare it to the house itself, which is a densely packed row of houses in a square around an open cooling courtyard. And these are the kinds of characteristics that you see that we find also quite beautiful in our own eyes in terms of aesthetics and pleasure as well as comfort. You have the courtyard house, and then you have the row houses. These are in Tucson. When pioneers came in Arizona after 1855 and the Gadsden Purchase in southern Arizona, they used a combination of principles of adobe construction and building forms that they brought with them from Louisiana and Texas. Here is John Slaughter's ranch house right on the border near Douglas, Arizona, where a hallway house, just kind of like the Spanish zaguan corridor and courtyard worked. Likewise, here's another use of breezes through what they call a dog trot cabin, where you have one room or pen used for living spaces and the other for the kitchen. And most of your time you spent living on the porch or in the breezeway. When it came to the 20th century, progressive Americans were blessed with the technology of the automobile, concrete, steel, electricity, natural gas, water, and sewer. This is when we began to have these modern materials and resources available to us. In this period, the Victorian cottage and the craftsman bungalow were both very popular styles, yet they were more concerned about style than they were about substance or sustainability. Two, you had revivalism. This is an Italian Renaissance revival style house that was rendered in adobe. This was my office for some 23 years in the Encanto Palmcroft neighborhood. And I can assure you that the way this house was built and how the air flowed through it, and we were kept cool by the adobe walls, it all was a great sustainable strategy for living in Arizona in 1929. After World War II, modern Americans were blessed with new housing types, the ranch style house, that made use of all of the conveniences of evaporative cooling and then air conditioning, of steel and concrete, and yet it was remaining stylish in its reference to the true historic ranch houses of California and of Arizona. Bringing that concept up in the modern era into futurism, the contemporary houses were a very popular style of mid-century modernism as well. So let's take a quick tour through the Ellis Shackelford House of 1917 here on Central Avenue and about McDowell Road. This is the home that was just on the tipping edge between sustainability and stylishness. Let's take a look at some of the concepts that we learned about a little bit earlier. This is the floor plan of the first floor, and you can see here on the far right, a big veranda that wraps around the front corner of the house and projects out to catch breezes. And that's precisely where I would sling my hammock. You'll find iron rings set in the wall and the posts so that you can put your hammock up in there. We have a sleeping porch down off in the lower left-hand corner, and you'll see the indication of shade pergola on the west side and a porte cochere, a drive-through carport on the south side as well. In the middle of the house, you see a chimney, goes up to the second floor where there's more fireplaces, and that is what could warm the house from the center of the building in the wintertime. Let's go through some of the features. The building itself is self-shading with forms and deep overhangs and awnings. We have the wraparound veranda and then these bracketed overhangs that shade the upstairs window. Here's the porte cochere that actually is providing shade for the shading porches. So it's kind of suspenders and a belt in terms of the south side protection. Note also the oleander hedges there that also help protect the driveway from collecting heat and reflecting it again during the day. The windows themselves are wood. They're double hung so that you can bring in cool air at the bottom and exhaust the hot air at the top. Here too, we have the idea of raised basement with earth integration. And you'll see here a rain gutter that goes down to the water cistern, so that this house actually collected its own water from the seasonal rains here that they used in the home and for watering the gardens and lawns. This was really a forward-thinking place in that it still has its solar water heater on the south side to supplement the energy needs in heating the water for use in the house. On the back side, you can see the 4 windows, sleeping porches on the back, the pergola, and in this picture, the trellises had been removed, but that was a vertical screen filtering the west sunshine from the back wall of the house. Inside, here's the fireplace. It is like a Rumford fireplace, which is the most efficient method of building a fireplace that is doubly useful in creating a very hot fire that eliminates so much of the particulates in the exhaust and the smoke of the flames there. House also had coal-fired boiler and radiators throughout the house as well. This is the hatch that accepted the coal down into the bin in the basement to feed the boiler. So too, not only are we managing heat, but we are also managing resources. Here's another example of rain harvesting. And two, at the Shackelford House, there were kitchen gardens. This one is done in the methods used by the Hopis with what was called a waffle garden for produce. Okay, so what is the way we deal with using these secrets of the past today? Well, it seems to me that after World War II, we were all in machines for living. That's how our houses went from being efficient in the way they were built to relying upon cheap electric energy and gas to heat and cool your house. But now, with energy becoming so precious, I think what we need to do is, instead of making a smart house, we should make a wise house and go back to passive cooling and use that first. In your own home, you are living in the house of the future, because not many of us are going to rebuild our homes, but we're going to retrofit our own homes, starting with the easy stuff first, about shading and gardens and water and so forth. And in so doing, to put in a plug also for preservation, even if you're living in a relatively new home, it's ideal to preserve the architectural character of your home, to be true to its style whenever you remodel it for retrofitting. You need to balance the architectural character versus the resource savings when you are energy refitting your house. And think long game, not just the immediate reward. So prioritize your energy retrofit methods based on full life cycle returns and not just on the initial construction costs. In the future, I suppose we're going to be going back to building new houses that really engage in the principles of the past. Here, Marlene Emerzian, architect, has come up with a comfortable home that can grow with the family using these very same principles. And it becomes an affordable way today to build a house based in the past, using these building features that were inspired first by case study homes of the 1950s. It is scientifically studied to reduce the load of heat in your home. It uses an energy efficient envelope to seal in the cool air, and it uses principles of gravity chimney to let air out the top of the house to bring in cool air from the bottom. And it puts in various systems, the smart house systems, to supplement the wise house systems already in place. So, like Yogi Berra said in his hindsight about predictability, the future ain't what it used to be. These are the lessons that we can learn to retrofitting our own homes. And I leave you with the challenge that has been dealt with since time immemorial of desert civilizations. Think about how in the world your house would perform if you had no mechanical or electrical technology to make it comfortable. That's your challenge now. Use these principles. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Don. Really enjoyed that presentation. Our next two speakers are Russ Myers and Jason Wills. Russ Myers is an industry veteran in a wide variety of mixed-use student housing, hospitality, and retail projects. His historic preservation experience has touched some of the most iconic structures in Arizona, including ASU Manzanita Hall, the Phoenician Resort, Park Central Mall redevelopment, Uptown Plaza redevelopment, and Scottsdale Fashion Square. He is a proud Arizona State University alumni and an advocate for mentorship in youth and future construction students as he leads Kitchell's recruiting and internship programs. Jason Wills leads American Campus Community's ESG reporting efforts and is heavily involved in the company's on-campus development projects, including market analysis, project feasibility, design, team oversight, and managing relationships with college or university partners. Jason works closely with partners to customize housing solutions that best serve the student body as well as the university's mission and values, architectural design standards, financial goals, and operational needs. To date, Jason has spearheaded 64 projects totaling nearly $3.2 billion in development value, including 17 of their 25 largest projects. So without further ado, I give Russ and
Alicia, thank you so much. Good morning. So the project we're going to describe is a fairly prominent building on the ASU campus in Tempe. We're going to show you some of the historical work, and we'll talk through some of the problem solving that got it to its current state. And I should point out that the architectural team who is not here with us is Studio Ma and SCB, or Solomon Cordwell Benz, and they have provided some images that we're using today. So Manzanita Hall, I like this picture because it shows what a prominent building it is, but also what an island it is compared to today. The building was designed by Cartmel and Rossman. It opened in 1967, and over its lifetime, they say that 40,000 students lived in this building. When the university looked at renovating this, and I love these images, note the prominent use of avocado in the color scheme. When the university started looking at renovating this building in 2007, it looked like it wasn't going to be possible. At that point in time, while it was, the building had almost all of its systems failing, it was thermally very inefficient because of the exterior enclosure, and the finishes and all of the build out was very dilapidated. And the other thing that had happened is a lot of the back of house spaces had become actually kind of dangerous There was a lot of clutter, there was a lot of inefficiency, and in the building, there were some life safety concerns as well. So in 2007, the university did a feasibility study to see what it would take to renovate the building and establish these priorities, which was they wanted to see an academic program. They wanted to honor the design heritage of the building. They wanted to maintain the campus identity. And one of the things that made this building so unique, and Russ will give you more detail about this, is that structurally, it's a very different type of building. You can see the lattice work on the side is effectively the structure of the building. So it's almost like the building has more of an exoskeleton. It made it a very prominent building. And for, I think, more than a decade, this was actually the tallest building in Tempe, Arizona. All of that created a lot of challenges related to structurally renovating this building. And one of the things that we determined pretty early on is there was not going to be an extreme financial benefit to renovating the building. And I mean, just from a third-party business perspective. So when we looked at it with the university, they said, well, let's find a way to make this make sense. And to the university's credit and a very creative financial team, what we ended up doing is cross-collateralizing this building's cost and effectively return on investment with another ground-up construction building that occurred simultaneously. And that effectively made both projects feasible. And through that creativity, this building was given a whole new life.
And so before Jason moves to the next slide, I really do want to applaud ACC, and most developers, I think, probably would have run from this project. Yes, it's iconic. Yes, everybody knows about it and would love to be associated with it, but there was a lot of hair that had to be raked through with a very stiff comb to make sure that this project was feasible. And we will get into the original skin systems here. And so we affectionately, I think a lot of people affectionately remember these Superman windows that were built into these the V structure, this exterior exoskeleton. Now that exterior skin system, you want to talk about sustainability? That exterior skin system was 1.5 to 2 inches thick total. That's exterior plaster or stucco, insulation, framing members, and interior plaster, 2 inches thick. So I would imagine at some point you could fry an egg on the inside of that window in the middle of the summer. So to convert that to the system that we have today, again, from a developer's perspective, we actually had to decrease the livable square footage of the building to make it more efficient. Developers don't like to limit or decrease square footage. So it had a major impact on the livability, but in the end added so much value to the residents to make it more efficient. And so that new exterior skin system was actually pulled back away from that exoskeleton. And instead of a 2-inch system, we installed a thermally broken 9-inch system that had water vapor barriers, very efficient window and insulation systems. It was really a pleasure to be a part of.
So, and Russ is being kind when he talks about the inefficiency of this building. It leaked like a sieve, energy, water, everything. And you can see the Superman windows that he's referring to were such a challenge. And the word I got from the university, and this is circa 2009, was that every time they replaced one of those windows, it cost $2,400 just because of the unique shape. And I remember sitting there scratching my head and saying, how are we going to renovate this building? And two, the architectural team's credit, the solution was you don't try to put wall systems within this within this bracing system. Instead, you step back from it. And as Russ said, we lost 6 inches in stepping back behind that and another 9 inches. So in every unit, we gave up effectively 15 inches of livable space. And it was completely worth it. So the new wall system was effectively panels and low-E glass. And really, the other thing that happened is it really created, I thought, an attractive texture behind the lattice system that really improved the previous look.
And most importantly, what color do you think we chose for those aluminum panels? If you look at the color, if you look at the color of the bark on the Manzanita plant, that's the color of the building. It's fabulous.
So the other important kind of aspect of this building being outdated was there was not a lot of community space in it. And the joke prior to the renovation was the most community you had was when you were in the elevator going up and down the building. So we looked at the building and decided that we would effectively add a structure outside the building that that would attach to the building and become the lounge. So you can see all the way to the right in that section, you can see these lounges were added. And within the goal was that the building would be broken up into neighborhoods. So each 2 floors would be a neighborhood. And so you can see on the top right that there's 2 floors that are shaded together. Those floors basically opened into each other. And within those 2 floors, there were 2 private study rooms, laundry, a kitchen, and a big social lounge, and a beautiful view of the city. And all of that was pushed out, but we maintained the structural supports inside that space, and it really defines the lounges. It really makes them look beautiful. I guess we did cut out the V at the bottom in order to make it walkable down there, but I think this is one of the most brilliant pieces of this renovation is that space was not only enhanced, but it kind of honored the existing architecture.
Yeah, that was a fun and challenging structural concept to remove the lower support V structure, but we had an upturned beam on the top that really created the guardrail system, and we put a glass guardrail on top of that. But to the most interesting and challenging piece of this is that I actually had not window washing davits. I had kind of a spelunking team that had to come into the project, anchor their ropes to the top and belay down to really start some of the structural aspects of that, because it's 15 stories. So how do you get there? So lots of safety ropes and secondary systems, but always fun to see Spider-Man climbing around the outside of the building.
So the end result of those improvements are what you see here. Where the lounges are identified at every 2 levels, and it really, I think it gives the building a new life. Obviously, it is a preservation of an existing structure, but it feels very current in this situation. And Russ, do you want to speak to the integral concrete?
Well, Jason and I were reminiscing earlier about the project, and you know, sometimes things are discovered that you had no idea existed. And so you'll notice the outflanking cast in place structure here that was actually integrally colored, but over the years have been painted. For some reason, they chose to go a different direction. So we exposed that, did some samples, and ended up sandblasting the whole structure to expose not only this face, but the east and the west faces as well. but yielding, I think, a great result of unhidden, unknown potential.
So the other thing that I had addressed earlier is that we had a really convoluted lower level plan and a lot of spaces that just weren't available to students. And so we went in and basically started exploring that basement level floor plan and realized that not only could we make that usable space, but if we effectively dug that space out to get natural light into it, and we created a light well, that we could bring natural light into it as well. And so not only was it available space, but it became very comfortable and attractive space. And so you can see what we ended up doing is we, in order to get students into the space, we put things down there they would want, which was specifically, we brought their mail down at that level. We put a study lounge and an academic success center there. And so it really has become a nice place to find students. And I will say, today's generation, Gen Z, is really a group that likes to study together. And so even buildings that we had built 10, 15 years ago, what we're finding is there's just not enough study spaces because this group is so comfortable meeting in 2 to 8 people for study. And then from a residential perspective, I had mentioned earlier that we really tried to organize the community. And so the first thing is we wanted to find as much parity in the units as is possible. And so we developed kind of it was kind of a spatial program, and the unit kind of matriculated around, and we had kind of some weird angles that come because of the facade. And then we tried to create on every 2 floors neighborhood spaces that kind of organized all of that. And then something that is alluded to in this plan that I wanted to talk through is we actually had some strange and varied ceiling heights throughout this building. And as we were updating all of the MEP, which was running through the corridors, we realized that we wanted to create the appearance of as much height in those corridors as is possible. And so we developed a solution where we only dropped down about half of the ceiling and we left the other half exposed, which is great, not just for maintenance, but also because it gives you the feeling that that space is more open. So I think many of us, if we were to have walked this building prior to the renovation, would have found it very uncomfortable to walk around in. And it's significantly better today. It's a really pleasant experience.
So one point that we want to talk about is the introduction of new technology or expectations into old spaces. I don't know how many stories we heard about in preparing to build this project. I remember when my sister lived here. I snuck out the Superman windows, I actually heard at one point. But from the Tempe Fire Department, I heard many stories about the elevators and how they would often fail, about how frequently they would try to squeeze in 15 or 20 people literally stacked in the elevators just because why not, which would cause them to fail. And so they would have to come in the middle of the night and try to rescue people out of these elevators. So because of the way codes have changed and whatnot, if you notice the elevator cores in the middle, you'll notice the smaller elevators or the existing elevators, all 4 elevators looked that way when we started the project. And they had a stairwell behind them that went top to bottom. And the fire department rescue personnel also mentioned to us that there was not a gurney-sized elevator in the building. So they would have to go up the building with their gurney, sit it in an upright position, treat the patient, load the patient, no matter what the situation was, still have to put them in an upright position on the gurney to get them in the elevator to get them down. So one of the challenges we had was to increase the size of one of the shafts. So we took the back wall out, which was 12-inch cast in place concrete. We added a single stair that added that connectivity in the neighborhoods. So it connected one floor to the other, so you could be part of that neighborhood. And we added, full gurney-sized elevators in a 15, really a 16-story, because the elevators went down to the basement. 16-story elevators. So a lot of challenges around that. How do you fly all that equipment up to the roof of the structure and lower it down? But what a great example, and how much fun it was to watch a robot demolish that wall and that set of stairs, so we could place a new set of stairs. Again, a lot of developers would have objected and run away from a project like that because of, this is just one story of many in which we had to pivot and understand how we could make it pencil financially and meet the schedule. Students are coming. We couldn't delay the project. So just great examples of teamwork and how we all work together.
And Russ, it's still not enough elevators.
I'm sure.
Another, I think, really important aspect of this was we had talked about how the rooms kind of moved around the building, and that was actually challenging because we had basically stripped the building down to just its concrete structure. And as we rebuilt everything, we had to be very careful about protecting that concrete structure. And so, Russ, why don't you describe kind of the work that went into identifying where all of these post-tension cables were?
Yeah, so this is, we believe, to be the first post-tension structure west of the Mississippi when it was built. And so it was interesting. The existing bathroom was against the common area corridor. And while that stayed in that same general location, obviously we had to core drill and install new stacks of plumbing, both freshwater feed lines and then the sewer lines that ran down into the structure. So it was interesting. I actually got to the project after some investigation had taken place, and we had literally x-rayed the structure to find out where some of these tendons were. And I get to the job site, and I felt like I just forgot his name, who's the black and white era Dr. Marcus Welby, I think was his name. But I felt like a doctor pulling out these x-rays, trying to line them up and see where the rebar structure was inside the concrete core. And so we ended up adding new technology. We actually bought a ground penetrating radar machine that would show us exactly where all those tendons were. Now, the interesting piece was, and this could be a structural debate, is that eventually, again, this was a 1967 structure, eventually those post-tension cables, those tendons, aren't needed any longer. So those are really needed while the concrete is curing. So we drilled through several, even though we went through all the work to identify, we did drill through several. Now, if you hit a post-tension cable in new construction, most people will tell you it sounds like a gunshot. It is very dangerous. You don't want to stand on either end of that. It will tear up the concrete floor and obviously all the finishes that are in close proximity to where that tendon is. We drilled through several or found several, as Jason alluded to earlier. There were water leaks throughout the building. So lower in the building, we found some that had just simply rusted through and were rotted in too. And the structural engineer came back and said, those are probably no longer a requirement of the structure to stay in place. So no repairs were needed. We had to repair a couple, but interesting to see just how much damage can occur in a structure that had allowed to leak as much as this had.
And the other thing I should point out is we had to be very careful in how we organized the plumbing, the new plumbing, when we put it in. And so we actually developed kind of an oversized linear chase that's alluded to in this drawing, where all of that plumbing kind of came together with a really standardized organization that I think gave us a little bit of comfort as we were putting all of that back together.
And additionally, we really haven't talked about it much, Jason, but there is a dining hall, which you can see at the bottom of this image. The round piece is a dome in the dining hall, and some of that tower resides over some of the back house area in the kitchen. So we had to put new chases that ended up living in the ceiling of the kitchen that we routed out.
So what I like about this image, after we showed you the image where the building's kind of an island from a few decades ago, is this really shows how we were trying to activate the space and create kind of covered, usable outdoor spaces. And so a couple of things you'll notice, there's bike parking. We created a shaded entry into the building, that canopy. We tried to create an outdoor residential terrace. And so not only do you have planters and a beautiful deck, but there's a basketball court and a volleyball court and a little bit of turf that works really nicely and connects everything into the rest of the campus core. So kind of shows you some of the outdoor images that we had talked about. The building still, to me, feels it has a lot of integrity and it feels very prominent still, but it does kind of have new energy to it. Here's that deck that we had referred to. And you know, the other thing, as you know, in Arizona, is getting these kind of nice shaded spaces is really important. So there's places where we develop shading, and there's places where the building creates its own shading. This is shows again some of the ground floor. But Russ, do you want to talk about the terrazzo here?
Yeah. So shame on us when we cover beautiful terrazzo with sheet vinyl. And so again, discovery, we had an idea this existed below sheet vinyl, and in fact it did. So we were able to remove it, restore it, and luckily, because of great trade contractors, they actually said, oh, I know exactly. So there's 3 colors of stone in that terrazzo. So they knew exactly where to source those 3 pieces of different colors of stone. Obviously, they can tell how much of the matrix was the epoxy or cementitious members versus the stone, and they were able to replicate that. So they both restored the existing and were able to push and replicate that into new areas of the building. Fabulous work.
And this is another image of those added neighborhood lounges that I think really shows the character of those spaces and what a spectacular view the students in Manzanita Hall have. Couple more vanity shots. Showing you just some of the quality of the student spaces. This is in the basement area that I was talking about. So this is under those neighborhood lounges. And this is where they effectively dug out and created a light well to get light into the basement, which really was effective. And by the way, that was not in the plans. That was a last minute decision based on some construction savings and a few extra dollars we had. And you can see the building getting used today. The approach we have to study spaces, and by the way, this used to be old kitchen and storage areas, is we're trying to design spaces that 2 to 6 students can comfortably kind of filter into. So if you think of the way students walk on the street, we want them to be able to walk and automatically be absorbed into a space like this. And so you see kind of varieties of seating and density. And then, you know, we wanted to celebrate the Manzanita aesthetic. And so you can see that the angular facade shows up internally in design elements and in the lighting and other things as we try to bring some of the iconic structure style inside the building. And that goes the same with this shading element that was later added. And that's all we have. Russ, is there anything we missed?
Probably, but nothing I can think of right now.
So the building opened in 2013. It's been a huge success. I get really excited because Manzanita actually has kind of its own ASU student following. And so on social media, I follow Manzanita, and there are students who develop songs about it, and there's TikToks out there. And it's really cool to see this building that was so difficult, you know, only a decade ago. And it has this new life and this new prominent position on campus.
Thank you. We will now be moving into the Q&A section. So if anyone has any questions, be sure to put them in the chat. My first question that I have for all of the speakers is, could you talk more about why this work and considering the environment is so important?
I think it's fairly obvious that with changes in our environment and the cost of fuel, electricity, the loss of our runoff in rain and snowpack is going to take us back to perhaps the environment that pretty much wiped out the prehistoric Indians of Arizona, that is pre-contact with Anglos. And we need to look at the sustainable lessons that they teach us in creating our new homes, as well as in retrofitting respectfully the houses that we live in today. The house we live in today is indeed the house of the future. We need to reduce the heat loads on them and to conserve our resources just to survive as a comfortable, healthy civilization.
Yeah, and I completely agree, Don. I really enjoyed your presentation. One of the other things that happens, and you were talking about kind of modern building techniques and how they've taken us away, they've usually been driven by cost. And one of the things that we recognized early on with this building is that we could never have built this building today. And so it was a real treat to be able to renovate and give this building a new life. And to be honest, we felt we had an obligation to save this building. It was so special. And once people tear a building like that down, it's never getting replaced with something of a similar or equal quality.
Yeah,
It's true. It's true. Once it's gone, it is gone. So congratulations to you on your successful project. That is a giant scale version of what most often at my studio we deal with in much smaller scale.
And Catherine, I saw you had a question about Manzanita, and I do want to share all the reflected glory of that building. It's won lots of awards, both in academia as well as student housing. but mainly and well-deservedly so for great architecture and great solutions. We're very proud to have worked with a really good team.
So I've got a couple of questions for Don. Where can we find your book?
My book
Yeah.
on mid-century marvels.
Yeah.
You can buy your copy at the Phoenix City Hall for a grand total of $25. It is the best bargain ever for a hardcover coffee table book that you can make afford. Thank you.
Oh,
Lovely
show us.
assistant.
It's
This
through
is just like
the
on TV.
it's through the Office of Historic Preservation, which is under the Planning Department.
Yeah, and my hat also goes off to Donna Reiner. I mean, she was a co-conspirator in finding all the facts for me to grind up and put forth for everyone. And here to Eric, who is being my webinar engineer today. He did all the graphic layout for the book. So it was a hands-on small group that put it together, and it was all paid for by a grant from SHPO and administered through City of Phoenix Historic Preservation Office. So it was a big group effort. Send copies to all of your friends in Minnesota.
And I've got a second question for you, Don. So you officed in a historic building, and I believe it was Adobe.
Yes.
So my question to you is, did you allow technology to fight the natural rhythm of the building? I.e., did you turn the air conditioning on because you had it, or did you allow the building to function as it was designed?
Even with this Adobe building, which had 18-inch thick walls, which is, by the way, the magic thickness for Adobe to actually work in the daily cycle of heating and cooling. What we had to do was use the air conditioning in the worst parts of summer, especially in the humid monsoon season. Otherwise, we kind of just opened the windows and the front Dutch door, and we opened the door up the back. So the air came in the front Dutch door and went out the back door upstairs to the screened sleeping porch. It had all the parts and pieces that I was preaching about today, and it made life very comfortable, except in the summer. And I will say that because it only had a single air conditioner instead of split for upstairs, downstairs, that was always a problem in the building. So that was really the only single thing that I could complain about in the performance of that building. And it wasn't the building that was such a problem. It was actually the way that the modern system had been put in,
Right.
making use of the old forced air ducts inside the house. So it was an improperly installed system in the 50s or 60s that made it difficult. The other thing would have been for me to have put a membrane under the wood floors, because we would pressurize the rooms and we would be pushing air through the cracks in the floors. So we did not have a fully tightened envelope because of the wood floors. And then conversely, we would get air coming out through the cracks in the floors. That, and I can't say enough about how wonderful the wood windows were, even with single glazing. After we got them weather tight in caulking and weather stripping, those windows were just great. And you need to think once, twice, and three times in your historic home if you think you are going to get rid of your wood windows in order to improve your performance. It's not the windows first, it's insulating your attic first that's going to make the difference.
Thank
Other
you.
than that, I have no opinion.
None at all.
Dawn, we had a question for you from the chat saying, can you remark on the elements of the Manzanita rehab that have a historical basis in sustainable design vis-a-vis your presentation?
Oh, this is for me?
Yes.
Oh, crisscrossing over to Manzanita. Oh, okay, that's fine. Well, what I would have been concerned about was the adverse effect of change to the character defining features of a historic building. This is the thought process that we go through when we evaluate what our design is doing, not only for the efficiency of the building, but also for the character. It's balancing style against substance to be sustainable. So I think by realizing that the true historic significance of Manzanita Hall was its structure. That was the key to opening the imagination of the architects and of the builders to create a new useful building by keeping that which is the character defining essence of Manzanita Hall, which was that it both physically and even symbolically was a beehive in structure, but it was also a beehive of activity of the students therein as a place to live and play. So I applaud everyone that worked on it, and including Tempe historic preservation folks at ASU, that they saved an icon of the campus and have not had an adverse effect on the elements that made it so remarkable in terms of technological advances and even artistry of modernism.
Thanks, Don.
Well, Don, I really enjoyed hearing you speak. One of the things we had talked about before we started is books that we were looking at, and ironically, I was reading Facing Southwest, which is on houses by John Gaumin, and it's one of my favorite books because his approach to light and ventilation and spaces is old school sustainability and really leans more towards passive house, which you referred to kind of passive strategies many times. I don't, there are not a lot of examples of larger scale passive sustainability, but you see it everywhere in homes and in residential dwellings, and more that's a strategy that we're bringing into larger buildings like Manzanita. And so even when we were planning that building, our discussion was, thermal, a thermal wall is our priority. And our second issue was bringing the benefit to losing those 15 inches was we're also naturally shading those units and creating some benefit to those interior spaces.
Exactly.
I really enjoyed the fact that you went all the way back to historical native homes. I thought that was really important.
Those were some smart guys.
Yeah.
Doing what they could do with what they had in the time they were. We should do so well.
I have one more question, and it's for all of you, and even Catherine, if you'd like to, if you have anything to add to it. what are ways that we can make our buildings our historic buildings more sustainable, including, like, say, if we own a historic home, like, what are some things that we can do to improve that?
Well, the very first thing is respect them and don't tear down the ones that are both important and sustainable in themselves. I know you're fishing for more physical solutions, but I think it all begins, Catherine, jump on this one, with public education and understanding of the value of historic buildings themselves and the principles behind the historic buildings that makes a difference to us all. And if the people only understood the value of these buildings and the embodied energy that's inside of them, somebody has already spent the money to build the building, like Manzanita Hall. Build that one again today, ain't gonna happen. Catherine, what do you say? Public ed?
So I'm assuming you're saying public ed in the sense that our public institutions need to lead the way with making sure that their projects model sustainable design, which I fully agree. And I actually applaud ASU for recognizing that Manzanita is iconic. And unlike yourself, Don, I actually, as the SHPO, see many proposals to take down buildings about the scale of Manzanita. I mean, Manzanita is big, but I mean, certainly there is an ethic that it is old, and it would take a high degree of creativity and cost to really modernize, especially the interior of the building, to bring it up to contemporary technological use, to to make sure the mechanical it can be put in. And so I particularly, I'm enamored of the way that you were able to transform the interior of this building, and actually not using a whole lot of materials. It's really, I mean, the strength of this project is the design. I mean, you didn't bring a whole lot in there. In fact, if anything, you took away, and I think that that is really super clever. As far as here in Arizona, um, I mean, aside from the nitty gritty of preservation, which is, and I absolutely agree with you, Don, the fixation on windows and heat loss. I mean, I can't tell you how often we get calls from our office. Hey, this guy from X um, manufacturer is telling me I will save this much money if I pull out all of my steel casements or all of my wood double hungs, and I go with this product. And you say, have to tell that person, you will save money over the course of maybe 30 or 40 years to recoup your initial investment. But honestly, that you've then gone and added to landfill, and your footprint, your carbon footprint is just incredible. And absolutely agree that insulation of the roof is the way to go for that. So aside from just sort of the nuts and bolts of those types of decisions, those micro decisions on how to basically weatherproof your house and create a more sustainable residence. I think the solution is literally right in front of us, in the sense that we have a tremendous amount of underutilized buildings in our core of our cities. So we look here in Phoenix along the light rail line. We've got great transportation. We've got product right there, commercial building product. And I would say, historically in Phoenix, have lacked creativity in terms of examining what we can do with those buildings. And that's why the Manzanita example is so wonderful, is that just basically like, hey, we can take a building and we can reassemble some key elements and do something really creative. And I would love to see more of that being done with buildings that aren't necessarily even, quote, historic and register eligible. They're just there. And Lucas Lindsay does a great presentation. Lucas is a developer as well. He's on our Historic Sites Review Committee. He does a great presentation on Circle K's and the adaptability of the historic Circle K to a wide variety of small business needs, business incubators. And so, you'll recognize that form, and that it's a box with an overhang. I mean, it's got like a cantilevered roof, and you see them everywhere. You see them, some of them are still Circle K's, but some of them are head shops, and some of them are pet grooming facilities and corner stores. And there's just, I think that's a really good model for looking at even something that is really pedestrian and not high design. What can you do with it to really prevent it from going into landfill? And we haven't done that well in Arizona, and I challenge us to do better with that. And there's policy stuff we could do on our end to incentivize that type of adaptive reuse, and that we haven't really cracked. I want to say we've just cracked the surface of, but any sort of policies we can put in place to really have people take a second look at buildings rather than just say, hey, it's easier for us to design on with a clean slate.
And I'd like to piggyback off of Jason's point, coming from Don's perspective. We really have to jump into and embrace some of the existing technology that was built into these structures. And that's kind of why I asked you that question, Don. There's a rhythm of how that building was designed, and how even so, your examples, Don, you open the windows in the morning, you draw that fresh air in, you close the windows mid-morning or early afternoon, you reopen the windows in the evening. There's a rhythm of how that building operates, and how, so we need to embrace that and just recognize we are living with that living building. And secondly, Jason, this may go back more to you, but my daughter just graduated from Baylor University in Waco, and she's going to stay in that town. So we spent the last couple of weeks looking for a home to buy for her there. And it's this interesting juxtaposition of a lot of 1940s, 50s, 60s homes that we were looking at. And some had been remodeled and some were original. And then we actually went to a new home builder, and it was nice. It was fine, but there was no charm.
Yeah.
Compared to what we had seen in those mid-century models. So we were really drawn toward that. So let's, again, to Catherine's point, let's not dispose of that. Let's not throw that into a landfill.
Let me just jump in quickly on one more aspect of the unseen obvious of my little office adobe. This is not something that's technical. It's totally aesthetic and human. Because this house was constructed and designed as an Italian Renaissance villa, all of the rooms in it were either perfect squares or golden rectangles. It is absolutely amazing. When you pull your tape measure through it, the Fibonacci numbers on the sizes of the room always come up, of 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55. Those numbers are everywhere in both plan and in elevation and section in that building. And that is what made the whole building so harmonious and promoted creativity of me and my architecture staff. So I had to put that in, because buildings are not just machines for living and working. They are actually, in the case of this, with the Renaissance proportions, something that actually hooks the human body and the proportions of fingers and joints and, the little Vitruvian man diagram to your environment. It was hidden in the building.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. That's how we sized those vertical portions of the neighborhood lounges, is they were golden triangles as well. So something I was just going to give credit to Ron McCoy, who was the ASU architect at the time. He's since moved on to Princeton, but he had always, on any project, new or renovation, he had always reminded us that architecture represents a time and a place. And one of his points that he kept coming back as we were effectively adding new, more modern systems into the Manzanita building is he would say, does this building still represent a time and place? And it was kind of the litmus test we would use as we were going through that process. Sure, it's going to be more sustainable. We're doing this and this. Is it still a desert building? Is it still an Arizona building? Is it still represent this 1967 period of architecture? And so it was good for him to frame success within those parameters as we went through that process. And I'm happy that you look at the building today and you can recognize it from before. We didn't turn it into something that, you know, where we covered it or hid it or changed the way it looked in the process.
I would see your bid and raise you one. This is what I have just learned very recently in doing an important remodel project, wherein I'm learning that being respectful of your place is more timeless than being also respectful of your time. That is to say, if you have a neoclassical building that has a 1960s formalist building next door and a brutalist addition on the back, you're going to find that people will respond to the style and proportions of the neoclassical, dislike the mid-century modern, and absolutely despise the brutalist. Now, the trick is, what do you design the next edition to look like? What I think it needs to be is none of the above, but to use the inherent principles of design, elements of design, of proportion, rhythm, and so forth, and the environment that you are working in to make it of its place. Otherwise, you will be doomed to criticism as trying to be of your time, which goes out of style.
Yeah, and you see that with some of the newer developments. I say newer as in like 90s and aughts in our edge cities that really have the stylistic principles that are, I don't know, I guess you'd say neo-Tuscan. I don't, what do you even call it with the, you know, the big sweeping entries and the human scale is just completely out of proportion. And you walk into these spaces now, at least I do, and they just feel wrong. And I know that from an energetic perspective and from a sustainability perspective, it's absolutely miserable. But I mean, with the combination of cheap materials and the soaring ceilings, I mean, I don't know, but you know, there are buildings that just feel right in our landscape.
And there you have it. My office that felt so right was a Renaissance building.
Mhm.
That office that I showed you for a split second is a true Tuscan building. Everything else that we have today in our popular tract housing is all Mr. Potato Head architecture, where they glue on symbols onto ill-proportioned boxes. You begin with the proportions and the right size and shape and interrelationship, and then you don't need to put the symbols on it because it feels right from the beginning.
So let me ask you this, since we're talking sustainability and we're talking about the full gamut of design. The next big threshold in preservation is going to be the preservation of brutalist architecture, which most of our civic works in the state during, say, late 60s to early 80s really are reflective of this sort of brutalist aesthetic. How is brutalism in terms of sustainability? You're working with a ton of concrete. You got very minimal glazing going on in your building. Are these essentially like inherently sustainable forms?
But what happened?
I know that people don't like brutalism. Let's just say in popular mindset, these are buildings that don't really engage well, with humanity in the sense. But that said, to demolish these buildings, and we're dealing with this at the state capitol right now with the redevelopment of the state capitol. We've got a ton of these brutalist buildings. To demolish them, the amount of just material that would go into landfill would just be, oh my God, quite a bit. So what do we do?
Well, you have to remember why brutalism was invented. It was immediately after World War II in Britain that the country needed to reconstruct after the Blitz. And so the use of this concrete solution and steel and so forth was a fast, easy, affordable, and seemingly permanent solution to their immediate needs. They did not look at their environment. They did not look at the long term. They needed to get people housed. They needed to have new institutional buildings. And it was the universities in Britain and then Europe and then America that embraced this, especially in Arizona, because concrete was plentiful and easy to make. We do have a lot of aggregate here. And that's why so many of these brutalist buildings were embraced by governments and institutions. Can you think of a brutalist house tract? No, there aren't any. And so if we are to keep brutalist buildings, I suppose there's two ways to do it. Find the best of the best in terms of design and style and the principles of brutalist architecture, and keep those. The others, rather than tearing them down, I guess you would follow Frank Lloyd Wright's precept of doctors bury their failures, architects plant vines. And so I would challenge the state of Arizona, instead of tearing down these buildings, that you should retrofit them, keep the building's shells, much like you did with Manzanita, which is absolutely a beautiful building. But aesthetically, perhaps we do the solution to brutalism to keep them out of landfills by approaching it with a green screen slip cover.
Interesting.
And I'll have a new idea tomorrow, so whatever.
Retrofit them.
Yeah.
I love it. This could be a topic in and of itself. It's just, we're just starting to see these properties come across our desk for determinations of eligibility. And it's a challenge. There are those who appreciate the aesthetic, and I guess I'm just not sure, like, from a sustainability perspective, if these are essentially really good buildings that, are they like, you're dealing with a lot of concrete. They stay cool in the summer? No, they don't.
Nope.
Okay.
Remember, even Adobe is a very poor insulator. It's almost as bad as stone or concrete.
Okay.
The secret of Adobe, don't tell anyone, is because it is also very poor in tension. It's great in compression. Old timers had to build 18-inch thick walls to make the Adobe stand up properly. And thus they gained the secondary aspect
benefit.
of
Okay.
the diurnal cycle of heating and cooling going through the walls day and night. So the garage of my little house was 12 inches thick. It had 12-inch walls. The walls in the house were 18 inches thick. Oh, you could tell the
Big
difference.
difference. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
So insulate the bejeebers out of the inside of the concrete walls and plant vines on them to shade the concrete in the first place. All you have to do is follow the retrofit territorial technology tips that I gave you today at a massive scale to take care of the problem and keep these brutalist buildings out of the landfill.
Great. Well, I think we have hit our hour-and-a-half mark. This has been a great conversation. I want to thank you, Russell and Jason and Don. I'd love to continue this conversation, and already I'm writing down ideas for our next webinars. And then also, I would be remiss if I didn't say to folks, if you enjoy this content and want to actually meet people in person and discuss these ideas, the perfect venue to do that is our statewide preservation conference, which we have branded Preserve AZ. This year, we are going to be in Yuma, Arizona, historic downtown Yuma, Arizona, and at the Quartermaster Depot. And our conference theme is Cultural Crossroads. And we will be in beautiful downtown Yuma, Arizona during perfect weather, October 19th through 21st. So if you are interested, check us out at www.preserveaz.com. Registration will be open, I want to say, within less than a month. And again, I want to thank you, Alicia, for putting this series together. This was a great capstone to the series, and looking forward to more of your really great ideas. Fantastic. With that, have a wonderful day, gentlemen.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Alicia.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a
Thank you
bunch.
all for coming.